Hello and welcome to day 8. I'm just taking this little 28-second audio opening to say that I'm glad you're joining me again. I'll probably have to get caught up on the end of day 7 because I kind of went off on a tangent. The first time I've ever done that, maybe second. But let's see where day 8 starts off. I believe Abby and Gary were in the middle of doing something related to hoping to find their friends. And I'm jumping. I often start a new writing day jumping around because I've thought overnight or the course of the day or whatever that, oh my gosh, I just realized that, hey, this didn't work, or this might work better, or there's some logic that's wrong, or I thought of a line of dialogue or something. So let's see what I'm doing here. So they're looking for them. They're at the creek at the resort, of course. So let's see. All right, so Holly's on the plane. She's thinking ahead about her case, or not her new case or new assignment in Miami, which is what she has been hoping, waiting for, not literally for 14 years, but for a long time. And yet, she just, as I wrote in that first line, the third sentence, right under the twin engine plane, is something doesn't feel right. That's another thing that's hard to convey because visually, I mean, you don't want to write she squirms, she twists, because that, to me, that's what I used to do, and I probably still do it. But I have allowed myself the liberty of just saying to the actor slash director, not slash director, but actor or director, something doesn't feel right, and let the actor and the director decide how that is going to visually play out. So then I did some research, and as Holly said in her first question, can you get Paul on the radio? Because I guess, when you fly on a commercial airline, they don't allow you to use cell phones, and I don't know for sure if that's because you can't. It's dangerous, and maybe I've already had this conversation with myself in this commentary. But I don't think, I think you can try, but I don't think you're going to get that great a coverage. So she goes up and is trying to get the pilot to maybe get a hold of Paul somehow. And then, as he says, whoops, I've already jumped onto that, but you'll, I guess, have to read what happens. So now Paul and Holly are having a conversation. And for me, when I write, and I'm just looking at, I've probably got almost 10 lines back and forth with no direction in the middle of that, which is a lot for me. And some people, and there's nothing wrong with it, there's nothing bad about it, will have, 2 pages of just straight dialogue. And so the question I always ask myself is it just so super captivating that the audience won't care what's happening, or is it so obvious what's happening the audience won't say, well, what's going on while this dialogue? I mean, if they're walking down the sidewalk or eating a meal or something, you can get away with it. But I never like to have a whole bunch, even a half page of dialogue with no action slash direction is a lot for me, but that's just me. Things like chuckling and laughing, smiling, grinning, those are other things that, frankly, I'll just say it, I struggle with how much to put in there. I guess I may have said a rule that I've sort of come to understand is that if it's obvious, if someone tells a joke, we expect that someone's going to laugh, cry, whatever the situation, the emotion is. But if it's something ironic that you don't expect, that's when I would put something in. And then the audience goes, oh, I wonder why she didn't find that funny, or I wonder why she's not scared, or she is scared, or something like that. And now, oh my goodness. So again, I go off on tangents and I don't really see what I'm writing here. You can probably follow it better than me if you've been reading this instead of listening to me, or maybe you're multitasking, which I should be doing more of. So I'm going back to rearrange some early dialogue, it looks like, based on maybe Holly and Paul's conversation many pages later. Because one of the things I wanted to, I don't know about establish, but bring out is that after Holly leaves, obviously, what's Lexi going to do? If she's going to decide to live with her mom, which might be a bit of a stretch, but she's only 18. She is going to college soon. But what, when she's not going to college, where's she going to live? Is she going to go back to that house and they're going to have new agents there? Well, if she gets out of that WIT-SEC program, then certainly not. So I think I was playing a little around with the logic or with what's going to happen next. Oh gosh, I picked a bad day to start listening to my gut. That is something I probably wrote and thought, oh, that sounds like a good line, but I can guarantee you that I hopefully have removed that since writing it, because that's obviously an Airplane, the movie, inside joke. All right, so we're back there. The elderly owner. Okay, so now we come back here. Abby and Gary have been looking around. They haven't found him, so they're going in to where the owner, the co-owner, whatever, and just getting desperate to figure out what is going on. The police. Okay, and then Paul comes. Okay. See, as mentioned before, I'm reading this probably at least 30 days after I wrote it, so it's kind of an interesting perspective because I know things that have changed and things that have not changed, but I won't give too much away, at least not on purpose. So there's a little tension. Every scene, of course, has to have, tension, has to have drama. I'm sure I've said this several times before, the ticking clock, the raising the stakes, that sort of thing. Where did you see them last? Between their two agencies. Two agencies. So Paul is trying to reassure them that things aren't as bad as they seemed, or they seem. And maybe whether he believes what he's saying right now or not. I think it's true, but as I write there, they don't seem impressed or convinced. And then I realize, oh, I've got r/is in there, so maybe I'll come back and clean that up. One thing I was thinking while writing this is Abby and Gary and Larry, how do they refer to Lexi's Aunt Holly? Do they call her Aunt Holly? I don't know trying to think what people call me that are my nieces and nephews. Some do call me, but friends of theirs. So I guess regardless, the point is Abby starts to say aunt and then of course realizes that she's not really her aunt. So I think it pretty much goes with Holly. But Paul's saying she's gone, she's no longer involved, but I want to keep her informed. And Paul again ends the scene, tries to reassure them, and Gary states he's not asking the question, we're not in any danger. And Paul confirms it by shaking his head. That's another tricky thing of when you shake your head or when you nod your head, because sometimes people ask like a double negative question and then it's like, what do I do? Occasionally you'll see me jumping between screens and just ignore that. I don't know that I will have had time to go back and cut out all those frames. All right, so I'm reading this to remember what happens. So Paul is out looking for them and trying to find out what's going on. They see a helicopter Paul is ignoring them because he's more concerned about what's going on here. So we pop back into the plane. And okay, so Paul has seen the helicopter, and now we learn, despite what Gary asked, it's one of yours, that Paul doesn't think it's theirs. And so what he's thinking and what he's telling Holly, and I believe this communication would be possible, that this is obviously maybe a helicopter that's taken the kids and maybe Rachel, who's going on. So Holly is immediately thinking that she can try to chase him down, not literally like to have a air-to-air dogfight or something, but he is hearing from Holly that she wants him to go back to the airfield. And then Holly is talking back to Paul to find out if the FBI knows, if they're in on this. As Holly just says, you think they're in on it. And so Paul is confused. Either the FBI, who we do know is in on this, has taken over without telling him, or these bad guys have come and have got the kids and Rachel, and it's not good. Okay, so now we introduce the possibility that Holly is wondering, could Rachel have talked to Salerno and is working with him somehow? And clearly Paul doesn't know, but he's a little suspicious. So this sort of plays out, and now with this new realization, Paul understands that Holly is going to come back. I can't talk you out of it. And so there's obviously thinking on the fly here, what are we going to do to find out if the FBI did this, if the bad guys did it, who's doing what, who's playing us, etc. So now that is all happened, obviously Holly is not excited. She's frustrated, which is why she slams down the thing. So now, for the first time, and I did this obviously on purpose, instead of having the whatever happened, the kidnapping, the heist, we don't know what happened. And so I thought it would be kind of cool if we saw Gary and Abby, if we saw Holly, and then obviously we've seen Paul. And so maybe it's been, I have to go and look, maybe it's been 10-ish screen minutes before we've seen Rachel and Larry and Lexi to see what has happened to them. And now we see that apparently Larry and Lexi were drugged at some point, or they're unconscious, and Rachel is with them. And even though she is fully conscious and obviously knows what's going on, she feels bad. I don't know about that pain etched on her face. That's another thing, that how you convey someone feels guilty, they feel bad about what's happened, without just saying she feels really bad, which I guess suppose you could write. So the person she's talking to, I purposely didn't identify it. I think at the time I didn't really know who it was. Is it Salerno himself? Is it one of his henchmen? Exactly what? I just realized I started that scene out with a question, and it'd be interesting to see how many scenes I start with questions, or how many questions I ask in a scene, and how many times people answer questions with questions. I think I've mentioned that before, but I found out that's a good way to keep moving along, because you can imply an answer in your question, and sometimes you can just skip the answer, but it will become apparent somehow, instead of just like a police procedural where it's like, what happened on that night? Well, I went to bed. What did you do the next morning? Well, I got up. And we can see that Rachel is kind of concerned that they took who they think is her boyfriend, and that tells us, of course, that she thinks that Larry is Lexi's boyfriend, which may or may not come into play. And then we find out that Rachel is assuming that they're not going to be in any danger, that whatever is going to happen, but it's not going to be at the risk of Lexi's life. And so even though Lexi is not conscious, Rachel ends the scene by saying it'll be okay. Obviously, as I wrote there, her words barely even convince herself, because that's who she's talking to, herself. So they have gone, Abby and Gary have gone to pick up Holly at the airfield. And I sort of, which is the beautiful thing about writing of any sort, you can twist geography, because I looked at this Eagle Resort to see where it was, if there was an airstrip nearby, if there was an airfield nearby, airport nearby. And I kind of tweaked things, and I'm sure no one's going to care. But it's funny how when you look at a map and you see the airport's 100 miles away instead of 15, you go, oh no, what am I going to do now? And it's like, well, you're the writer. You can do anything you want. So don't look at that. It's top secret. Carol Fromm. Ooh, I got a new subscriber. Anyways, so Gary is suspicious about what's going on. Holly is, she's glad that they're picking her up in the sense that she's got to get back, but she doesn't really want to deal with them too much. And then what I was thinking in this scene in Gary's car is, geez, I wonder if, would we expect them by now to have called their parents to explain what's going on? And so then I thought, well, if they did, what would they say? Would they tell them the truth? I think Lexi and Larry have been kidnapped, but other than that, the trip's going great. So I thought, well, maybe if Holly told them to call or asked them to call, what would she say? And she's kind of telling them to tell the parents, obviously, that you're going to be home tonight. Something's changed on the trip, and you've got to come home. And of course, Abby comes back with the fact that she's concerned about Lexi and Larry. And then Holly comes back with the fact that, well, it doesn't really matter what, whether you guys are here or not, you're not going to pull out guns and you're not going to save the day. So Abby turns that around to say, well, then I guess we can stay. And Holly turns that around and says, yeah, you can stay at the resort, but neither of you is getting an inch closer to wherever she took them. And then that sort of opens up the Pandora's box. Oh, you think Lexi's mom was part of this, as Gary says. And so they start speculating what's been going on. Holly scolds herself, as I say. So Holly probably did not do this as well as she could. And I think what I'm trying to get across here is she's thinking less with her head and more with her heart, which I think I overtly say later on, or maybe I've already said it, which is never a good thing when you come out and say, hey, you're thinking with your heart and not your head. That's like horrible dialogue. So if you see me write that later, know that it will hopefully be changed. Each other. So now Gary and Abby are finding out about the FBI. And that raises more questions for Abby and Gary. Brilliant boss is trying to work through that. So obviously frustration on Holly's end, frustration on Gary and Abby's end. And I apparently have gone somewhere because I haven't done it. Oh, here we go. Sometimes, as I mentioned, I'll leave the computer and forget to turn off the recording. One thing I did notice, and I may have mentioned this, how many times I mentioned the time that has passed where Rachel has been in jail and Holly has been on assignment, so to speak. So I think the point of this scene, obviously Gary did not go with Lexi, is feeling some amount of remorse, guilt, shame, whatever, maybe not shame. And so he's, in a way, maybe taking it out on Holly, trying to blame her for what happened, which we see play out at the top of page 42. Abby, being kind of the peacemaker, doesn't want the drama, doesn't want the conflict, but without conflict and drama, there is no story. So always, there's nothing more boring than two people getting along and just talking about whatever, even though that happens in real life all the time, but that doesn't obviously further the story, etc. So now Holly is sort of snapped and is going to show him who's boss. All right, so this is obviously the culmination of what maybe the audience has been wondering, what Holly's been wondering. And then I'm bringing this thing about identical twins, and I'm trying to figure out how to word it. I may have mentioned that my wife and I have twin boys that are going to be in this movie. Once it gets made, that's confidence for you. So I'm writing this specifically for them and for the Holly actress, a person whom I cannot name. I'm not saying she even knows I'm writing it, but I have like a slight, one of those 6 degrees of separations connection. So anyways, back to the point I was trying to make. I'm trying to get to the idea that, identical twins, what does that really mean? Beauty's only skin deep. Appearance is only skin deep. Obviously, although maybe Larry is not known as Mr. Brave or anything, he did choose to go with Lexi. Gary chose not to. And so that's kind of the dynamic I'm trying to play with in that scene. Once again, I have spoken longer than I have written. So thanks for watching day 8. We'll see you for day 9.